Insiders, this is the interview you have all asked for. I have received so many messages from you all across social media and on the YouTube channel asking for Dr. Gavin Ashenden. Now, Dr. Gavin Ashenden has been away in the US, but as soon as he got back, I recorded this interview with him. It's explosive and it is unfiltered. He talks about the late Queen. He talks about the demise of the UK, the role the King has played in the demise of the UK, how the government, he believes, are trying to erode everything that Brits stand for. This is one of the most important interviews I have ever done. Many insiders are based outside of the UK, and I'm frequently asked to keep shedding light on what is going on in the UK. And this is an interview that I feel everyone needs to watch. Dr. Gavin Ashenden has previously told me exactly the way things will go in the UK and indeed Europe. Sadly, his predictions have been right, and he does the same in this interview. This is not an interview for the faint-hearted, but if you truly want to know how the King plays a pivotal role in the demise of the UK, this is the interview you need to watch. This is also an interview that would never, ever, ever be shown on mainstream media because there are certain narratives you don't go near. Not on this channel, insiders. And so, as the government try and clamp down on independent journalists like myself, may I take this opportunity to thank you for all of your support. It is only because of you I am able to bring voices like Dr. Gavin Ashenden that the mainstream media censor to you. So I'm forever grateful to all of you, and if you are not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. I know it's annoying when creators ask, but truly we are in the fight of our lives in the independent media space. The government are over amplifying all of the big corporates and the propaganda, and people like myself that are unfunded, we are going up against those corporate parasitic elites that want us gone. But we shall continue, insiders, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Gavin Ashenden.
Great to be here again, and thanks for everything you're doing. It's very important.
Well, I love speaking to you. I think you are so wise. You are incredibly ahead of the time. A lot has happened since we last spoke. When I last interviewed you, you told me the future you believed looked like South Africa in the UK. And when you said that, I thought, no, absolutely not. And it's only been 3 or 4 months since we last spoke, and everything you've said, sadly, looks to be more and more like a reality. We've also had King Charles change the wording of his oath, ultimately in the sovereign grant. Now, whilst it's not legally binding, ultimately, everything that King Charles does is about PR optics as well. So I want to start by asking you about him changing Defender of the Faith to Defender of Faith in a multi-nation state, whatever that word salad means.
So there's some very important elements to this. There's a legal element and the historical element. Who are we? What's our constitution? Why do we have it? What's going to happen if we lose it? How are we going to replace it? That's one thing. Then there's the furniture inside King Charles's mind. It's a particular shape and size and quality, and it has nothing to do with the constitutional arrangements. So his mind and the reality of his office are at odds with each other. Normally, that's a definition for madness. And we are in a kind of political and constitutional madness. And then the third element, I think, is the situation on the ground, what's happening in the country to people. So if we just look at those things very briefly, the answer is the constitutional position is really very serious. It's actually not one I'm very much in favour of. I dumped it when I became a Catholic because I thought that the Protestant experiment, whereby Parliament tells the king he's a defender of the faith, has run out of steam. It's just not real anymore. I mean, your listeners probably know that Henry VIII made a bid for independence and set himself up as the Pope. And the Pope had already said to him, "You are the defender of the faith." And then when he went AWOL, the Pope said, "No, you're not," and not unreasonably. Parliament, however, were very jealous about this title because in those days, in the 16th century, being defender of the faith was a grand and important way of saying that the king had moral integrity. So Parliament gave him that title, and Parliament therefore can take it away or can police whether or not it's used. Now, as it happens, the present day Parliament doesn't care two figs for it, but nonetheless, it's responsible for it. So, for the last 500 years, the kings and queens have had this title, and it's been part of their job. And round it has been built the establishment of the Church of England, an enormously complicated and legislatively complex measure. And the king has decided unilaterally that he doesn't want anything to have anything to do with it. He wants to junk it and change it. So it could be junked and changed if Parliament decided to rewrite to rewrite or reformat our unwritten constitution. But Parliament can't even find time to pass laws to deport a Pakistani gang rape organizer. So the idea that it's going to start reconfiguring our constitution from the beginning is just for the birds. It isn't going to happen. So like it or not, Charles is stuck with a constitution he was born into and prepared for. So then we go to his mind. What's happening in his mind? Well, he needs a therapist, a psychiatrist, or a better constitutional advisor, because if your mind is at odds with reality, you need to change your mind. Otherwise, you get into trouble. You decide you have special magic powers and you can fly like Superman, and you drop out the window and you can't. So Charles doesn't have super magic powers. He's the creation of Parliament. Again, people don't understand. The royal family is not royal like a Disney royal. It's a family that were invited in from Holland originally to act as king to stop there ever being a Catholic king again. Parliament have created this, and Charles just decided he doesn't like it. The question is, can he get away with not liking it? Well, if Parliament can't be bothered to police their own rules, perhaps. But the fact is that the situation on the ground is that a lot of us feel very powerfully that if the king abdicates his responsibility for defending the faith, for being faithful to the rules, the structure everyone's agreed to, you can't have a civilized constitution unless everyone agrees to it. Then we're in a kind of anarchy. And the moment we get into that anarchy, then the people who push hardest win. And we know who the people pushing hardest today are. And we don't want them to win because they chop people's heads off and they behave very badly. So effectively, what Charles has done through indulging his own minor madness is to endanger the rest of us, and we object.
I think that's such a good point as well about endangering the rest of us, because a lot of people would say, well, he's still legally defender of the faith. And I think sometimes people miss the point that who's holding the king to account? No one. He doesn't live by the same rules as us. So yes, he took an oath and that allegedly still stands. But if we go back in time, King Charles has never, I don't believe, acted in a transparent and honest way as a man of faith. We know that he had an affair. We have seen him become patron of the Islamic Centre. All of these patterns are very much at odds with the role he holds. Do you think it's always been his plan to chip away at the Christian constitution? Because the patterns, the evidence, this is a man that seems to do anything but defend the faith.
Well, again, three elements to that. As a Christian, you're allowed to fail. The great thing about being a Christian is you're allowed to fail, you can be forgiven. And if you say sorry and decide to change your life, you get to start again. So as a human being, as a Christian, there's a lot of hope for him. As a king, it's not quite the same. The rules don't apply. The thing about kings and monarchs and rulers are they're judged by their success. You're either good at the job or you're not. Charles is not good at the job. So it's taken an awful long time to prepare for it. But one of the ways in which we know he's not good for the job is he's trying to change the job unilaterally, which means he doesn't understand it. Has he always intended to do this? Yes, he has. I think the difficulty with being Charles and with being king is there aren't many people who can say no to you. You need somebody, you need a father figure who can come up to him and say, look, get real. This isn't going to work. You're being self-indulgent. You're behaving like a teenager, actually, and it won't do. And you're endangering the whole family. You're actually endangering the constitution. You're endangering the country. This is really serious. Grow up. Stop it. Get real. Now, nobody, clearly the valet who puts toothpaste on his toothbrush can't say that to him. His father's not around anymore. He can't say it to him. I don't think there's anybody who can, and therefore it looks as though he's taking this idea he's always had, which is he doesn't like Christianity very much. He's not terribly impressed by Jesus. If he was impressed by Jesus, he would love him and behave like a Christian. So I think he misunderstands Jesus and sees him as equivalent to Muhammad. See, that in itself is a terrible, terrible mistake. Muhammad is not a very attractive person. And the difference between Christianity and Islam is a difference between Jesus and Muhammad. Muhammad was a rapist, paedophile warlord. That's just historically the case. It's not a matter of opinion. He was a warlord because he led war parties. I think he had 240 battles in his life. He was a rapist because the Quran gives to the right of victorious Muslims the right to rape their victims. And he's a paedophile because everyone agrees he married a girl and took her to bed aged 9. So this is not, to my mind, a very attractive person, and I'm not a Muslim. I'm entitled not to be. I cannot understand how Charles wants to put Muhammad on the same platform as Jesus. I think it's just the most terrible judgment, but he does. And worse than that, he wants faith in general. Now, there are some interesting faiths. Islam has done some very sophisticated and wonderful things. It's not wholly bad. Nothing is wholly bad. And Christianity has done some bad things. We're entitled to judge them on what they've done. And I think, above all, the capacity to put themselves right, which I think Christianity has and Islam clearly doesn't have. You don't reform Islam, it's set in stone. But there are some other faiths that are not at all impressive, and I'm not going to do a rundown of bad faiths, but we're entitled to distinguish between faiths that improve the human condition, improve people, and have tested to do so. Faiths that build civilizations and faiths that destroy civilizations. The idea you can just say all faiths are defendable, and we need to have a zone in which they all take equal space, again, is a form of madness. It's historical and philosophical illiteracy. Most kids of 11 with common sense know to distinguish between things that work and things that don't work, things that are good for them and things that are bad for them. At the level of an important idea that the king claims literacy in, he's illiterate.
We've seen King Charles previously accept donations from the Bin Laden family. We've seen King Charles accept bags with millions of pounds worth of cash in from the Qataris and the Saudis. And we also have seen King Charles, he has never put his weight behind Israel. It's always seen that it's too diplomatically sensitive for him to be seen there. But obviously, when he goes to Arab states, it's totally different. The rules don't seem to apply. To me, it looks like he is the defender of the faith for Islam, especially from decades and decades of patterns. Where do you stand on this argument and debate?
Well, you're right. And one of the reasons we know you're right is that he has some very good reasons for being sympathetic to Israel. For a start, his grandmother's buried there. She chose to be buried there. Most people don't know that Philip's mother, was an extraordinary woman, really immense character, became an Orthodox nun in her later years and asked and was determined to be buried on the Mount of Olives. And she had a particular understanding of Christ's return. And this is kind of prime position, really. It's like courtside for a basketball match. And so she's buried there. And you would think, because Philip held her in a very high regard, and she was a very competent woman with a great deal of integrity. You think Charles might have, out of respect for her, have some affection either for Israel or the places she chose or the values she held, but he appears to have none at all. The other problem is that, and again, excuse me if I take a while to explain this, the reason that Islam wants to destroy Israel is because Muhammad developed a hatred for it. Muhammad needed, in order to prove he was who he said he was, another matter of the map inside the head being different from the map outside reality, producing a kind of madness. He needed the Jews to say, you are indeed a prophet, just like all the prophets we've already had, only better, like Jeremiah, like Ezekiel, like Elijah, like Amos. There's a long list of prophets. And Muhammad said, I'm the last of them and I'm the most important. And I need you to look at me and to recognize, if you like, to give me your stamp of approval. And the Jews looked at him, and I'm afraid they laughed. And they said, but you're illiterate and you've got it all wrong. Everything you say is a mistake. It's all wrong. You're being misled. You're a bit dangerous, and you're absolutely not a prophet. Muhammad was furious about that because essentially his campaign to be taken as the last, final, and accurate prophet depended on the Jews saying, yeah, you're in this line. Because see, the Arabs hadn't had any prophets. One of the things he was upset about was that the nomadic people who lived in Saudi Arabia, or that area of the Arabian desert, had not distinguished themselves or had no experience of the one living God. But the Jews had had over 1,000 years of this, and they'd written about it. Now, whether your people believe in it or not, it is the most extraordinary phenomenon in Jewish history. That for over 1,000 years, you had people popping up saying, this is going to be very awkward for me personally, but I've got to tell you, God has come to me to tell you to shape up. So this is what the prophets did. It was very powerful. The terms in which they did it were extremely moving and very profound. And they said to Muhammad, this isn't you at all. So he said, well, in that case, I'll kill you. One of the first things he did is he had a fight with a Jewish tribe who were a bit particularly obstreperous and near. He beat them. He took 400 men captive. And then the historical documents say that he beheaded them personally. 400 people, heads off with a sword. This is the warlord thing. Now, other ones said, no, he delegated the beheading of 400 Jews. But this killing of 400 Jews at the beginning of his campaign marked what was going to be 1,500 years of anti-Jewish hatred. Such hatred that all the Islamic countries around Israel are committed to its total destruction, to its complete and utter genocide. From the river to the sea means let's kill all the Jews and replace them with Arabs and Muslims. Again, this is at the level of barbarism. This is really appalling. But this is Islam's attitude to Judaism. I mean, you'd think whether you're a Baha'i or a Buddhist or a Republican or a Democrat or an atheist, you'd look at one society saying, we are determined to kill all of you, irrespective of your human merits, because of a historical grudge our founder had 1,500 years ago. And we're also willing to bring the rest of the world to come to some form of nuclear Armageddon to do it. It's not only mad. If it's not mad, it's evil. And if it's not evil, it's mad, or both. But this is the movement that Charles, defender of the Protestant faith, grandson of a very pious Orthodox nun, is willing to support, be sympathetic to, and promote in public. I mean, it's pretty awful, frankly.
What do you think is the cost to us from King Charles changing this wording? Because Gavin, I've barely slept since. I am so scared because when we give these things away, and ultimately, the law doesn't hold him to account. So PR optics are everything. And what he's done is he's chipped away at the Christian constitution. And that was the last thing I felt was protecting us from the tsunami in the UK. And indeed, around Europe as well. I know America are slightly behind us, but they will be facing potentially the same problems we are. It was that, the defender of the faith, that I felt was our last protection. From that going in the sovereign grant, I believe now we will see a rapid acceleration of that ideology and a decline. And what scares me the most is We will never, ever get this back. Once these things are gone, I hold the belief they're gone, because I think we're already pushing water uphill, trying to slow down the advancement of the other ideology.
So again, taking these things in order, but in reverse, tipping point. Are we there? I think we probably are. I think it's. I think we may have lost. Well, we've lost in the sense that there are too many Muslims in the country. They are too determined. They're too demographically fertile, just to use the language of biology. In other words, their numbers are going to grow exponentially and have been doing. I mean, let's look at London for just as an example. So, in my lifetime, my people, London was my city. We were 98% of the population. In my lifetime, that's gone down to 30%. It doesn't matter whether the 70% are Muslim or anything else. Just for the moment, the demographics mean that we've lost our capital city. It's been overtaken by people who are foreign, and most of them are not born here and don't share the values that we have, which is why London is the third world whole it is in so many ways. When I go to London, I get stolen. Things get stolen from me. I get mugged. My iPhone gets stolen. I have to tie my private property to my body if I go to London because it's dangerous. That's the consequence of moving from 98% indigenous people who are neighbours to each other and recognise each other to a place which is 70% full of strangers who don't care for each other at all. This isn't racism or xenophobia. It's what happens when you lose the social glue. The whole point about social glue is it turns us into neighbours where we recognise each other. And in that recognition, we can tell bad from good, for example. So, we can police ourselves because we can say, oh, these people aren't going to obey the law, they're dangerous to us. And these people need looking after. We know who they are. But in a society full of strangers, you never get to tell the difference between the good because you don't know each other. You don't understand each other's languages or each other's body language. So to make a capital city out of people who are strangers to each other is to create anarchy, and that's what's happened. Going back to the tipping point, it looks to me as though if we don't have mass returning of immigrants, then we've lost. We might save ourselves by having that. I suspect that what's going to happen is that there'll be civil war and a violent. It won't be the normal civil war, as in the way we had it in the 17th century, but there'll be perpetual violence on the streets. It'll be more like Lebanon, with the same kind of zoning that Lebanon has. There'll be areas. And one of the reasons we know there'll be areas is because that's how Islam starts. Islam will have certain areas and it will police them and it won't allow other people in them. Or if you go into them, you'll have to behave like a Muslim. Well, that's already the case, and they're really very proud of it in terms of what they've done. In Leicester is ours, they say. If you want to live in Leicester, you live under Muslim law, Sharia law, as a Muslim. And in effect, that's the case. There are no-go areas. The police don't police it. We see videos every day of two-tier policing where the police would rather attack and arrest an indigenous white person because they won't cause them trouble than provoke all the issues that health and safety and anti-racist legislation threaten to bury them under. So there are Muslim areas already. They will grow. I think the outcome of the struggle on the streets will be to preserve non-Muslim areas, and probably that's the best we can hope for at the moment. There'll be a partition of some kind. And again, one of the reasons I know this is because there was a while when I took not Charles's view, but I took the view that the Abrahamic religions were capable of working together in a fairly it was a very pretentious view. The people at the top of the Abrahamic religions were civilized people who could work together in some kind of concord. It was partly because I was working at university and I got suckered in by the pretentiousness and the illusion of that atmosphere. But during that period of time, I made a number of Muslim academic friends who worked for me. They lectured for me, and they said. In fact, I mean, I'll tell you what they told me because it's so outrageous. You realize I couldn't possibly have made it up. They said, first of all, we want the whole country, and this is a friend of mine called Dr. Saeed, and he was about to leave a lecture early because he didn't want to give a lecture. And he said, Gavin, I don't need to stay. We've won. This is about the year 2000. We've won. My grandchildren will inherit the Islamic Republic of Great Britain. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? I need you to do this lecture. You're the kind of cherry on the cake. People have come to listen to you. He wanted to get off campus because there was going to be a traffic jam. I said, I can't be bothered to stay. And I said, but what do you mean you've won? He said, well, we have the demographics. We've got 8 cities where the people under 15, 16 are the majority are now Muslim. In 20 or 30 years, they'll be voting. They'll vote in Islamic mayors. Tony Blair's just started his whole mayor business. This plays right into our hands because we will have Islamic mayors, and the mayors will have a democratic mandate to bring in Islamic customs and Sharia law. You are a democracy, you'll have to grant it to them. And then demographically, in numbers, we will win. Democratically, we will use it against you. In fact, he said, I find it hard to believe, but this is what he said. In fact, Tony Blair has already received a delegation of leading Muslim activists who've been to him saying, cede these 8 conurbations to us now in advance, and you will be seen as a prophetic statesman, and you will go down as one of the founders of the Islamic Republic of Great Britain and be much honoured in the future in our country. It's going to happen anyway. So why don't you get the credit for being the social engineer who made it politically and constitutionally possible? Do you know, my friend said, he said no to us. We said, well, it's going to happen anyway. You just lose the credit. Like you, I couldn't believe this in the 80s. I thought this is cloud cuckoo land. Here we are in 2026, and it's not only cloud cuckoo land, it's about to happen. And the reason it will happen is because there'll be conflict on the streets, and then the communities will protect themselves against each other, and the community enclave, the Muslim enclaves in these major cities will declare effectively UDI and say, well, we don't like you, we don't like your police, we'll police ourselves, we'll govern ourselves. We have a democratic mandate. At the moment, they're using their democratic power to keep Labour in power, and Labour are doing what they want in order to have an alliance that's convenient to them both. So although the numbers of Islamic voters are relatively small, they occupy a disproportionate leverage in our democratic process because Labour has sold its soul to them. But they don't need Labour soon. The next stage of what was always going to happen was going to be independent Muslim MPs. Well, they're not calling themselves Muslim MPs, they're calling themselves just independents. But it's the beginning of the Islamic Party, and the Islamic Party is determined to take power. And if you want to know what that looks like, Hillibeck's
Tower Hamlets.
well, Tower Hamlets, but also this terrible book called Submission, written by Hillibeck's, which was published on the day of the Charlie Hebdo murders. Don't ever forget what the Muslim terrorists did to the Charlie Hebdo journalists. They slaughtered them with machine guns in their office in Paris as a punishment for disrespecting Mohammed. On that day, this book was published, and it foretold, it imagined the next election in France, when there was going to be, as the author suspected, an alliance between the left and Islam. Well, it didn't happen in that election, but that's the strategy. It's already happening in our country. It's only a matter of when it plays out. So are we past the tipping point? I think we probably are. What will happen? There'll be partition. When will it happen? The sooner the better for us, because the sooner it happens, the less weak we will be, and the more of our country we may be able to retain, if we're lucky, if we're brave, actually. We have to be brave.
It's so scary, Gavin, because honestly, I remember when I interviewed you before and you said about the partition and segregation in South Africa. I thought, no. And every day that's passed, so much of what you previously told me, I just see with my own eyes. And I think of the psychological torture the public are going through, where people are in their communities, they're scared, they are seeing the king not defend them and the faith. And then they might pick up a newspaper or they might put mainstream media on. And their visual reality is being totally denied by everyone in positions of power. And this is torture for the public. You know, if it weren't for YouTube and X, people wouldn't actually be able to see the big picture of what's going on, which brings me on to migration and replacement. We're told, oh, Keir Starmer will smash the boats. I mean, it couldn't be made any easier for these people. We're paying for them and then we're spun word salad. Do you think we could ever truly rely on Shabana Mahmood, a woman who has said Islam is at the core of who she is? She's never going to be stopping, Afghans, Pakistanis, Syrians. They want more Muslims on the ground here, is my interpretation.
Lauren, it's much worse than that. I mean, I'm sorry to be gloomy, but we need to tell the truth, or we ourselves will be mad. We have to do a reality check. First of all, we've lost the police. I mean, the state is against us. Whether or not the state has been taken over by a single entity, the state is against us. So the police are not for us. In fact, they oppress us, the indigenous people. We've lost the police. The government is not for us. The government does nothing to stop immigration. Even if tomorrow the government said we will work for you, it's too late, but it would be nice. But then not only are they not going to do that tomorrow, they're going to continue to make it worse. They are against us. They are creating the problem that will destroy our nation and our community. The thing is, you don't have another nation, you don't have another home, you don't have another country. You can't, unless you're very, very rich and can live at the top of a skyscraper somewhere. You only have your own place where you bring up your children. I would say particularly your daughters. As a man, I'm very concerned about my daughter's safety. I will give myself for the safety of my family. That's what a man's supposed to do. And I'm very likely to have to do that, or give up on my responsibilities to my family and my children, which I'm not ever, ever going to do. So I'm being forced by the government to put my life on the lines to defend my family, and I'll do it. I very much hope that I'll be surrounded by other English people, other English men who will do it. At the moment, the people who've been putting their lives on the line for the protection of our company are the women. So the women the mothers who've been protesting outside hotels. To my great shame, the men were not there mainly. It was the women who were doing it. Our Boadiceas, so to speak. Well, both the men and the women have to do it now, because we have a little time to protect our own country, our own communities, what's left of them, and they will be taken away from us unless we don't protect them. I mean, it's so difficult. One has to use language that can't be capable of rendering you prosecuted for inciting violence.
Oh, I know. I mean, you just don't even know at this point what is going on in this country. It's two-tier, it's so subjective, everything. Now, Gavin, 50 years ago, we had King Charles set up the Prince's Trust. That coincided randomly, one may say, or some may use another word, but that started with the very start of the Muslim Brotherhood's 100-year takeover, which we're now 50 years through. I mean, sadly, I think they might be ahead of schedule. To me, King Charles is ideologically a Muslim. He's not a Christian man from the evidence that I've seen, and I've been studying this for the last kind of 12 to 18 months in depth. Do you think he is ideologically a Muslim? Because it goes beyond appreciating, the Arabic language or certain parts of Islam. His allegiance is consistent, and he's made it very clear to us.
I think it's important that we are able to defend everything we say and as truthfully as possible. And so it would be quite convenient to label him as a Muslim. But I think we have to be more careful than that. And apart from anything else, I don't think that's the shape of his mind. I think he's genuinely a relativist who likes a mixed economy of religions. He's very interested in religion. He thinks spirituality is very important. He gets this from Carl Gustav Jung, who thought that religious symbolism was the way in which consciousness and unconsciousness could do a kind of handshake and produce an integrated personality, something he called individuation. All about, essentially, it's the same language that all school teachers and politicians use when they talk about fulfilling children's potential. This idea of human potential is a Jungian one, and at its more sophisticated, formal level, this is the kind of philosophy that Charles is wedded to, and he thinks it happens through a mixed economy of access to different religious. So that's the formal position. And in that sense, he wants a society where religions can achieve this end goal of psychological maturation, maturing potentiality that he's committed to. Frankly, this is a quack of an idea. It's ludicrous. The idea that human beings are capable of this level of self-improvement is completely bonkers. And one of the reasons I'm a Christian is I believe in original sin. Human beings are potentially wonderful and in practice very dangerous. And you have to try and get some kind of balance between our murderous dangerousness and our capacity for the divine. And again, you can only do it if you're realistic. The idea that we can do this self-help program that Charles is committed to is a great mistake. But but what lies behind this, he wants to create an even playing field for all religions. He may or may not favor Islam, but it doesn't matter. Islam is the most muscular of the religions. It's willing to kill people to achieve its ends. It always has done. Most of the expansion of Islam in the last 1,500 years has been done by conquest. Some of it's been done by immigration. And the terms of the conquest are the Quran requires it. You give the people you've overtaken the choice between converting to Islam, paying a lot more tax than anybody would want to, and achieving dhimmi status, a kind of third-rate citizen who pays enormously for the privilege, or being beheaded or being killed. Those are the three choices Islam prescribes. So the reason I mention that is that if you have an even playing field with one of the parties behaving like this, the party that's most muscular and most violent and most threatening is going to win because there are no restraints. So what Charles is effectively doing is he's cooperating in the removal of restraint from Islam. And by doing so, that effectively means that makes him pro-Muslim in effect, even if he's not by ideological conviction. I don't think we need to examine his mind and say he is or isn't a follower of Muhammad, because we can't prove it, and it's not the point. The point is he's taken a political and a psychological and a personal position to create a situation in which Islam is free to do what it wants to do, and it will do what it wants to do unless we stop it.
Gavin, it seems unfathomable that everything that's going on in the UK would happen under the late Queen. Obviously, you were a former chaplain to her, and you're also incredibly knowledgeable about the Constitution, world events. Do you think we would have seen the rapid advancement of the Islamic ideology if Queen Elizabeth was still on the throne?
The answer is no. And the reason for the no is that there's a great deal of difference between the way in which Elizabeth II and Charles III are exercising their responsibilities. Queen Elizabeth was much loved and greatly respected because she was a woman of principle who put herself second to her responsibilities. That's a degree of moral alertness and commitment that people immediately recognize and admire when they see it. She sacrificed herself for what she and we believed in. King Charles has decided to use the system and sacrifice the system to what he believes in. And that's the difference. And the trouble is that's unworthy of a monarch. It's unworthy of the office. It's unworthy of a human being, actually. You don't use the people and the systems around you for your own values, even if you believe in them. You can only do it by consent. But Charles hasn't got our consent. And although you said at the beginning, well, he's just put this into an accountancy document, it doesn't matter very much. The reason it does matter is not because it's an accountancy document. He did it to avoid asking us for our consent. By putting it in there, he creates an atmosphere. No one challenges it. The fact is, the Public Accounts Committee of the House of Commons is not the most theologically literate body on earth. They're not bad with figures, so they're not very good with them either. But figures of what they do, slipping in this change of job description and talking about protecting multi-faith zones is not really their area of expertise. They were just going to nod it through. Once they're nodded through, it's in the system. But whatever the outcome of it, putting it in the system is, he did it in order to be surreptitious, in order not to ask us for our consent. in order to slip it into the system without it being observed and challenged. We have observed it, we have challenged it. That's not what it was intended, but it shows a degree of bad faith. Unfortunately, we have a monarch who's exercising bad judgment, bad sanity, and bad faith. And I think, that's one of the reasons why people feel betrayed. Should he abdicate? Well, he won't, of course. But given the way in which he's trying to impose his own agenda on the rest of us without our faith, I think the rest of us might find it that we have different views to him on whether or not he should continue in post.
Gavin, where in 5 years do you think that the country will be? We spoke earlier about what does the imminent future look like, and you said segregation. But in half a decade, if things progress as they are, what do you think we're looking at?
I think it very much depends on the next election. There are at least two routes I can see. One is awful, and one is less awful. A bit less awful. If both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party are deprived of power, a power that they've misused and used against us, a power, I mean, I didn't get to talk about the Home Office and the civil service, but the reality that we face is that even if we get rid of these politicians, we have a state that is stuffed full of people who are committed to the circumstances that we're in. I mean, to give you an example, the first time I noticed this was when the Syrian refugee crisis happened about 15 years ago. The Syrian demographic is that about 10% of the Syrians were Christians and 90% were Muslims. And just accepting the fact that we took in Syrian refugees, you would expect that we would have them in demographic proportion to their own makeup. In other words, out of every 10, you might have got 9 Muslims and 1 Syrian Christian. The Home Office made it impossible for Syrian Christians to come in, and none of them did. They were the only Syrian refugees who were allowed in were Muslim ones. And this was organized by the Home Office. Even at that stage, they had the power and the determination to make that configuration happen. And when I saw that happening, because I was very sympathetic to my brother and sister Syrian Christians who were having a lot of trouble, I was pleased we might be able to offer them some kind of sanctuary, but it was restricted only to Islam. And one of the reasons why all the Quangos are behaving as they are, accepting the most specious excuses of Islamic criminals to stay in the country because they like fish and chips, or they can't get fish and chips in Bangladesh. And so because you've developed, or your child has developed a liking for fish and chips, and there aren't enough fish and chip shops in Bangladesh, it would be unconstitutional and immoral to deport them for raping people. But these are the people who are now in administrative control of our country. So there's no point in just sweeping away the politicians. We've got to have a root and branch change. Well, the only person who's, I don't want to get political, but as a matter of fact, the only person who's even mentioned that is Danny Kruger. Danny Kruger is an immensely impressive man, and he knows exactly what the problem is. And he's suggested that there needs to be a root and branch reform of the civil service, or we get nowhere. So what happens in the next election? Well, we have to get rid of both the Conservative, the Uni Party, effectively, who brought us here. Personally, I think they should be prosecuted,
jailed.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we have to elect a party who will both either attempt remigration or be willing to consider it, but absolutely reconfigure the civil service. Do you think they'll go easily? They won't go easily. Absolutely, they won't go easily. So there will be conflict in our society. But frankly, the only way this can happen is if the British people are determined to save themselves for their children. I'm too naive, I'm too underinformed to know what this will look like when the cookie crumbles. But it isn't going to be nice at all. So that's the best way, or that's the least worst way. We sweep away the politicians, we elect people who are willing to change the civil service and effect some level of remigration. I don't think it's fair to judge Nigel Farage on what he says about Islam at this moment. Um, I, I, I think what's most important is that a party are elected who are not the Conservatives or Labour Party,
Or the Greens.
or the Greens, I'm sorry, or the Greens, or any form of idiot nationalist.
Yeah.
But because if that doesn't happen, nothing happens. So when whatever coalition or whatever non-left group are in power, then they can set about the Herculean and almost impossible task of giving us our country back, which will and that will provoke armed violence from people who don't want them to give us our country back. That's where the violence on the streets will start. So and we will find ourselves involved in self-defense at that point. So that's going to happen anyway. If the worst thing happens, then parties who are not going to deal with this will not be elected, and the present situation we're in will continue accelerated. And I'm likely to find myself in prison at the very least before the end of my life because if you speak out, you will be imprisoned. If you put Facebook posts up, you can be imprisoned. I saw a journalist complaining on Twitter last night outside a pub in Chiswick that a local councillor had got the police to send two constables to interrupt him while he was drinking, to complain about the fact that he was complaining about one of the local councillors getting rid of seats outside pubs. The police turned up, and in that mealy-mouthed HR language, they said, "We want to make you more aware of the difficulties of unsafe language that you're using." This is yesterday. So lots of us are going to get visits from the police who want to make us more aware of the consequences of using language that is unsafe. It's unsafe to them. It's unsafe to this
It's
group.
unsafe to the globalist narrative is what it
Yeah,
is.
exactly. So two ways ahead. They're both difficult. One is tragic and appalling, and the other is going to be immensely sacrificial, and it will depend upon us having the courage to save ourselves and our country.
Dr. Gavin Ashenden, it is always a pleasure. Stay out of jail. I will hopefully do the same, and we will chat again soon and see where we are with the predictions, because you've never been wrong so far. And as chilling as the predictions are that you've made, I do really value how honest and open you always are, and your insights and your voice are phenomenal.
Laura, thank you so much for what you're doing. It's really important. The more people who speak out in the public space while we have it, and we cannot take it for granted that we have it, we have to use it every single day to maximum effect. We have to, one small thing, we have to make networks of people who are like-minded so that when they take this public space away from us, they nearly did with Twitter. I mean, it's only better thanks to Elon Musk that they haven't been able to do it. Because that turned the whole climate round. I know you've given a lovely conclusion. Sorry,
That's okay.
But the number of things we have to do. We mustn't take our public platform for granted, and we have to be able to be in touch with each other when and if they do, as we prepare for the very difficult days that lie ahead.
I'm Lauren the Insider. If you value fearless, unfiltered commentary, hit that subscribe button for more of me on the ground delivered straight to your inbox.